afternoon. Today I'm in Westminster and I'm joined by the Member of Parliament for Watford, Richard Harrington. Richard Harrington was elected in 2010 and he's also the Vice Chairman for Target Seat campaigning. So Richard, what influenced you into coming into politics and why did you choose a Conservative Party?
Well, it's a very good question because I hardly had any experience in politics at all. I had no interest in politics before really because I was lucky enough to be the first member of the family to go to university, and my father, my late father, was very happy to subsidise me when I was at university, but after that it was get on with it, make yourself some money, and that occupied really the next 25 years of my life because I was involved with starting and building up two businesses and selling one, lucky enough to sell one of them, and I didn't really have much time for it. But I became motivated by politics by David Cameron. This actually gets into your second question, why the Conservative Party? Because I didn't perceive myself as being overtly political. I mean, I was a bit interested at university, but beyond that, I sort of watched my current affairs and news like anybody else. But I met David Cameron, and I really was very inspired by him through a mutual friend before he was a Member of Parliament. And I thought, look, I would be insulting you and your viewers if I said, oh, I knew he'd be Prime Minister. Of course I didn't know he'd be Prime Minister, I never thought he'd be Prime Minister. But I liked his views, and I liked the way that he wanted to take, for me, the important tradition of the Conservative Party, as laid out by Disraeli, to give people opportunities, the true one nation, which makes me laugh why Labour, which I think is very divisive, call it one nation. But I thought he had a good chance, his views, if they overtook the Conservative Party, they had a good chance of moving it on from being a predominantly white, middle-class, middle-aged party, with what was left of a lot of old-fashioned intolerance, which I must say, I can't say David Cameron sorted out, because it was as generations moved on, just as the Labour Party became less extreme, the Conservative Party became more moderate as well. But I think David Cameron had a view with what to do for that. It wasn't just endlessly going on about, Europe, immigration, in a bigoted and intolerant way. And I thought, yeah, this is a person who I literally have a lot of sympathy with him. And he really got me involved. And when he became leader of the party in 2005, which was only 4 years after I met him, he asked me to become one of the party treasurers because he wanted to get the Conservative Party away from 2 or 3 hugely wealthy people that had funded it and doing what Barack Obama became famous for in America, although of course they have huge donors there as well, but spreading the donor base. So I was able to organise clubs of small business people that before their donations probably would have been of no significance. If you get enough of them, they add together. So I was doing that really with no intention of standing for Parliament whatsoever. And Watford, a place I know very well. In fact, my first job was there in 1979. Actually, I did a graduate training course with John Lewis Partnership, and when they had a shop, they've got a big shop there now in a big shopping centre, but it was an old-fashioned "Are You Being Served" type of shop for those that remember the 1970s comedy film. So I'd always known Watford. My family lived around there. Did and do, and one of my friends, Ali Mirage, was the candidate in 2005 and he became third, and I was quite angry that the Conservative Party, which had held Watford from 1979 to 1997, could be reduced to a rather miserable third place, and that sort of fired me up really. And I thought also at the time of the expenses scandal and everything like that, where everyone's saying politicians do all the same, and irrespective of party, Claire Ward, my predecessor, she got a lot of criticism. I don't think she did anything wrong at all, but it was the sort of spirit of the age, with everyone being disillusioned with politicians. And I thought, some of your viewers might think naively, but I thought, well, I'm a bit different like this. I've built a business up from 2 employees to several hundred employees. I've had a lot of experience in life. I mean, if you're struggling to make your payroll, and your payroll is a week from now, and several hundred people's lives, not lives as in life and death, but livelihoods depend on it. You have a set of experiences which a lot of politicians don't, and that's why I thought I should go for it.
Do you have any regrets going for an MP? Or is
No,
everything
I
quite
don't.
positive?
I could have this regret. That is, you started too old, and you're not going to be in the cabinet or whatever, because I was elected when I was 52. But I don't really, because I had the benefit of a career before that. So I don't really regret that. I don't regret doing it, but I'm very pleased I didn't give it my whole life before. Apart from anything else, I feel that with the hours as they are, so I'm lucky enough we have two boys, but the youngest is 19 now. It's different from when they're very little, and I think it's a lot more difficult for people with very young children. And I was particularly annoyed that Claire Ward, my predecessor, she had two young children, and because she had a flat in London, paid for by the taxpayer quite properly, it was necessary for her to have a reasonably normal way of life, to be able to go and see the children after school, this kind of stuff. There was big resentment against it. And I'm saying this, I have no personal view, I don't claim any expenses, and it's not appropriate, but I do think if we want to get young women, and we need a lot of young women, because obviously a significant chunk of the population are young women, and they want to have children, quite normally, we can't have it like an old boys club where they go home, Thursday evening and see their family till Sunday, and somebody else looks after the children. It's much more difficult in practice, and I think Parliament's got to adjust to that.
What do you say is your proudest achievement after becoming an MP?
Well, in Watford, as opposed to nationally, quite clearly I've had 3 big jobs fairs that more than 1,000 people have got jobs and apprenticeships from. And this was using my experience in business to cajole companies to offer at least one new job or one new apprenticeship with a free stand, and I got Camelot, the lottery company, to sponsor it. So, this year 4,000 people came. So that's my proudest achievement. It's nothing to do with politics. Anyone could do it. I've helped Friendly's Labour MP do one. I think MPs should do that sort of thing. So that's a kind of non-partisan thing, but I do think it's a good thing. And I think because if you get a letter from a Member of Parliament and you're a small business person, you will open it, and you stand a bit more chance of persuading them to do something, like take on an apprentice. So I think it's using the logo, if you like, for a genuine communal benefit, rather than for a partisan benefit.
So what do you think is the biggest challenge facing Watford at the moment, and what are you doing to tackle it?
Well, Watford reflects the country generally in so many ways. I say that because many of the challenges are not local, it's to do with the national economy. For example, Watford has 50% commute to London. So the transport issue, again, national issue, but applied locally. 15% of the population are from ethnic minorities. Again, national issue, but applied locally. So I could go through all those sort of things that kind of reflect what will be on David Cameron's agenda. But the thing that underlines everything is the economy. So when I see unemployment falling as it is every month, that's very, very important to me. And in terms of what problems there are in Watford, the problems actually reflect the problems of society. So for example, we've got some fantastic schools, but the bottom end schools are having to be pushed up the hard way with the academies, for which I very much give credit to Ken Baker, who was the original Conservative minister who brought them in, Andrew Adonis, the Labour minister, who hugely pushed them through, and Michael Gove, who's continuing with them. So again, people might say, it's all politics, but I think education is the fundamental thing. I can recommend Andrew Adonis's book, Education, 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 for which he basically blames what went wrong with British education on the teaching unions and Labour councillors in the cities, but now everyone seems to be working together. But again, the problem is not the bright kids in Watford, it's the other kids, and that things are really improving there. I want a new hospital bill, because the old hospital is higgledy-piggledy, some old bits, some new bits, so I'm lobbying the government very hard on that. But these are all problems that are reflective of national issues. There isn't one thing I could particularly pick, because in some places where there's one huge employer, when that employer goes, then of course there's huge social problems. The mines are a classic example, or Leeds, where I was brought up, the clothing business, or similarly with you in Bradford, when the mill, where you came from, when the mills closed down. But it's moved on from that. There's 1,600 businesses in Watford that employ between 2 and 7 people. Well, they're not all going to close down, but their prosperity depends on national prosperity. So they're all national issues, really.
So you mentioned education. When I'm not studying, I actually work in a primary school. With the new education curriculum just actually been released, do you think that, first of all, is the education curriculum, are you supportive of it? And secondly, do you think there should be a cross-party negotiation on maybe the education instead of it changing every time there's a new government?
Well, I'll answer the second question first, in so much that, because I've said before, I think that more of education is cross-party than people think. Yeah, people come out with political slogans, but the general move, for example, the Tories don't support grammar schools anymore. In the old days they did. Labour has accepted that the old type of mass comprehensive school, again, things have moved on. So, general consensus. I don't, however, believe that there's a blanket solution to the curriculum, or a blanket solution to anything. Part of the whole Academies programme, of course, is to make schools a lot more self-governing. They are effectively, they're independent schools, but the fees, instead of being paid for by parents, as they would be in a private independent school, they're paid for by public money, but so much is open to the head and governing body. So I believe that there should be as much flexibility as we can get away with for the head and governing body to set the curriculum. As to your specific question about the proposals that have just been made, before answering, because I feel politicians can talk too much about stuff they hardly know anything about, so I'm making it my business over the next few months to speak to every head, primary head, and ask them what they think, because then I will be able to come up with an informed opinion, as opposed to someone who reads the newspapers like everybody else, chats to the odd person. So I'd like to hold off on that for that very reason, because I don't think it's something for political dogma. But I do think education is moving in the right direction. And there are schools, I mean, there's a school called Francis Coombe in Watford that in my younger days, I mean, it was an educational death sentence for a kid to be sent there. And for the first time now there's a waiting list. It's an academy, it's a fantastic building, the head's brought lots of new teachers in. And I think these solutions, and as I say, I do commend all political parties for it, I think overall they're the biggest thing that's happened to British education since the original 1944 Education Act, which was very well intended, but in fact worked very well at the grammar school end. I was one that was lucky enough to benefit from it, but not at the non-grammar school end, and I think the Academy's programme is the answer to that.
Well, thank you for that honest answer, and I think a lot of teachers will actually appreciate you going out to talk to them in your constituency. With your role as target seat campaigner in the party, a lot of, when you go door to door canvassing, there's a big problem, or there's a big issue around immigration, and people think, or immigrants, or people who have come over here, migrants, think that you're not listening to their views. What is the Conservative Party doing to tackle that misconception?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Just so I don't misunderstand the question, do you mean that immigrant families think we don't understand their
Migrant families, so people who have come over and have now settled, now got a British citizenship. Citizenship.
Well, like myself, because I'm only 2 generations away from that. I'm Jewish, and my family came over here to the turn of the 19th century. So I know it sounds like years and years ago, but you know, my grandmother, possibly like yourself, my grandparents were the first generation born in this country. Is that?
Well, my dad was the first generation.
Your dad.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of thing. So I have every sympathy with that, and I find amongst the and in Watford, where a lot of people came over in the 60s because there was lots of manual work in printing. Of course, it's all moved on from that. So I imagine that's the generation you're talking about. Well, you know, I think we've moved on between what it was before, which is that any talk of a policy was deemed as being basically someone was anti-immigrant and racist. I'm pulled between 2 directions here, and I suspect most politicians are. On the one hand, you've got vocal local population, including the migrant population, who are basically saying we don't want more immigrants because of jobs and because of a general feeling of people from the Asian subcontinent that they had it very tough when they came over, which they did, and it's far too easy these days. So vociferously anti-immigrant amongst the population, both migrant and not. On the other hand, I've got employers in Watford who can't get staff. People think that's ridiculous. There's nearly 3,000 people on job seekers allowance, but they can't get staff at both ends. Either people who are unskilled doing production line type stuff, or I need an electronic engineer, and there's a Malaysian guy willing to come over with his family and can't get a visa for him. So it's both ends. And I was so shocked when I took over this job to find that a mile away from a place where there's three job centre plus responsible for 3,000 people on job seeker allowance, was people saying they couldn't get unskilled staff. When you actually break down those 3,000, it's less now. I think it's about 2,500, but the principle remains the same. It's interesting. A third of them are people who are they've come onto the job market, and in the normal course of things, they find a job, because a third of them basically leave within 8 weeks. So it's the normal thing here: lose your job, register and everything, go through the system with doing a CV and appointments and all that. It takes about 8 weeks. So if you knock that third off, the final, let's say for rounding up, say 2,000, half of them are people actually of my kind of age, mid-50s, who typically, and I bet you find this in Bradford as well, and other what were big northern, what were manual employment centres, they've basically had one job since they left school, typically at 16 with no qualifications, and they've lost it for whatever reason. In Watford it might be a printing place closing down, or they've been a plumber with a big construction company and that's contract, whatever it might be. And it hits them hard over the head because they've never been for an interview, they've never done a CV, and unfortunately a lot of companies won't give some bloke or woman in or his mid-50s a chance, because they think, well, they want to retire soon, I'd rather get a 25-year-old who's dynamic, young, etc. That's a very difficult section, and those people have to be somehow retrained, or using the training that they've got. For example, someone that's worked for a big construction company as a plumber might not know how to do a central heating boiler in somebody's house, but can easily be retrained to do it, and then be self-employed, that sort of thing. But this is the important thing. The third, which is roughly 1,000 people, who are typically unskilled, a lot of them, I'm afraid, are unemployable. They go for these unskilled jobs and they don't stick at them, whereas the immigrant population does. And that's what we have to get to grips with. But I can't blame employers by saying, look, we need the labour. If you won't let us bring in the labour from Poland, then we're going to have to build a factory in Poland and sell the site for a fortune to build houses. So I think this is the problem with this country, and I've seen a lot of it in Watford. And it gets away from the old immigration, where basically some of the anti-immigration stuff was basically racism. People wouldn't admit it, but you can tell from the way people talk on the doorstep. They'll never say it, thank goodness. In my father's day they would, but now, because of legislation and society moving on, they just don't say it, but the undercurrent's still there. So I think the immigration debate has moved away from that. But the real problem is intolerance towards accepting that immigration has brought prosperity to this country for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Because people that think they're truly British, more British than you or me, actually, if they look back to their family, it's not so long ago that they came from Ireland or France, whatever it is. Of course, you can have that logical conversation, but if someone's bitter because they haven't got a job, and they think somebody next door has got a job or getting benefits, of course they are intolerantly against it.
Yeah, I was actually door-to-door canvassing the other weekend for the MP in Pudsey. And
Stuart Andrew.
Yeah, Stuart Andrew.
He's a good friend of mine.
He's
a nice chap.
And when I was one of the women that opened the door, she was like, well, the biggest problem is you immigrants coming in. I'm British born and bred.
Oh, cool.
Look, so there is quite a big issue at the moment, because people don't understand the difference.
No, and I remember canvassing during the election. I knock on this door, Indian lady in Surrey comes to the door, chatting to her, blah, blah, blah. She's very nice. She goes, oh, you must speak to, I can't remember the name, like Irene, my neighbour. Knock on her door, she'll like to meet you. So I knock on this door, and this lady comes to the door, white lady, and she starts going, well, it's the bloody immigrants, it's this, it's that, it's that. And I said, excuse me, but the lady next door, she told me that you're a friend of hers and to come to her. She goes, oh, not her, they're wonderful, they work very hard. I'm thinking, well, who do you mean then? Because it's this sort of theoretical idea.
And it's like you don't fit the norm and you look slightly different
Yeah.
as well.
But things have improved dramatically. I mean, my late father would remember in his childhood in the 1930s, I mean, people marched through the streets in this country in black uniforms shouting what today would be racial obscenities and beating up Jewish people or whatever. Moving it even on a generation, you know, in my childhood I didn't see it, but you read of these people that were renting out properties and they'd have no blacks, Irish, Indian dogs. I mean, can you imagine that? And so I think the immigration debate's moved on now, and I thank goodness that, well, I hope, if it's in people's minds, then I feel sorry for them, but they're not allowed to say it, and they're not allowed to do anything. And if they do, I hope, and I believe that the law's on them like a ton of bricks. But it's ignorance, isn't it? People are just ignorant. You know, we have to blame somebody other than ourselves. So it's easy to blame you because you have a different colour skin and dress differently. Or the same venom comes out against Europe because they've got some idea that Europeans... They have to find some reason to believe that the reason that one's own position in life is such, can't be their fault, it's got to be somebody else.
Do you think our relationship with the EU is beneficial?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, again, I must bring it back to Watford, but so many companies, I mean, they American companies, they're based in, I'd like to think all in Watford, a few are in Watford, they're everywhere, but they ship stuff to Berlin like they ship it to Glasgow. I'm sure if we were outside the EU, they wouldn't be there. But that doesn't mean I think everything's right with Europe at all. And I think we have got a chance to reform things. I think largely because we've got a lot of the European electorate on our side. Like the Germans, you know, German people's interests are very much aligned with British ones. And I think it will change. But no, I certainly think it's a good thing.
Do you think that we should trade with countries like China and India who have a lack of human rights? Or do you think we should avoid it?
Well, argument is, as I'm sure you know, is, yeah, people in Bangladesh might be in a sweatshop and earning £2 a week, but what would they be if they weren't in a sweatshop earning £2 a week? Starving. I do think that we have to trade with everybody because in the end it's the trade that breaks down the barriers. I do think, however, we have a right to insist on certain minimum way of life in terms of facilities in factories and things like that. You know, it's interesting the way Britain developed in our period of working classes being exploited by capitalists in the Industrial Revolution. After that, it was only enlightened people, many of whom were factory owners themselves, that gave proper facilities. Actually, many of them were from the minority Christian communities like the Quakers and people like that who did it for religious reasons. They were reasons they did it for. It started an improvement in workers' conditions and everything like that. Although it did give those people in the short term a big cost disadvantage against their competitors. I think as a country, I think the Western countries who buy these consumer products have got to agree on minimum levels of pay, minimum conditions. You know, Marks and Spencer's years and years and years and years ago insisted on proper toilet facilities and things for workers and a paid day off and things as a condition of supplying them. Why can't the big companies in the West do that? But in the end, we can't start saying we'll trade with you and won't trade with you, because who's going to really suffer? Well, it's the people in the country who say won't trade with.
With regards to festivals and religious days in Watford, how do you communicate with your local residents about sending on your best wishes on that day?
Well, the organised religions, by organised I mean they've got, it just happens not to be people of a particular religion that happens to be in the area, but people that belong to a Gurdwara or the mosque, because we don't have a Hindu temple in Watford, there are a lot of Hindus. So usually I get invited to whatever service or ceremony it is, and it's comparatively easy, because I'm happy to turn up, I enjoy it, I know all the people anyway. I don't believe in all this false sort of ethnic profiling and sending people Diwali cards when you don't know them and things like that. It's just my way. I think it looks phony. I would think it's strange if I got a card from somebody I didn't know. and I don't believe in patronising people. But if they are going to be at an event, it's a different matter. For example, the Hare Krishna are just based in Watford. You know, George Harrison, the Beatle, gave them a fantastic, like a manor. Well, of course, loads of people go to that, so obviously go to those events and things. But I think you can push it too far, this whole ethnicity business. I think people are predominantly, and want to be predominantly, British citizens. We're all lucky we live in a country where we can practice our religion or no religion. No one, well, I say no one says anything, unfortunately some do, but by and large, we're left to get on with it. And I think it's for MPs, in my view, to show that they've got the values that people have. It might be family values or small business values or the Ten Commandments, all of which seem a lot of common sense to me, whatever your actual religious views are. I think thou shalt not kill is fairly non-controversial. So I think MPs should show they've got those values, but I don't think they should play at being in the same religion as other people when they're not. I'm not a woman anyway, but if I was, where you see people dressing up in saris, some people say it's to show respect, but I think actually, I'm not saying they mean it for disrespect, but I think it's tokenism. And I think, if you go to a synagogue, you should cover your head because people cover you. Of course, you should do those things, but I think there's a limit, given that people know you're not of that religion or not of that ethnic group. I just honestly take people as I find them. I don't categorise them by ethnicity or religion. Some people feel that they have specific issues. For example, the Hindus want to have a free school in Watford, and of course I see them as I would of any religion or group. But I think most of the issues that affect the migrant population are actually much the same kind of issues that affect everybody else. I don't think they were in yesteryear when, as I said, when there were signs up, no dogs and blacks and all that stuff. That was something that was obviously in communities, that was a huge injustice just for them. And I would have fought tooth and nail against that, particularly as I would have been one of the groups that was excluded, but you know what I mean. But now I think, most of the Asians in Watford, they're rich or they're poor. They're professional or they're manual workers. They're male or they're female, much the same as anybody else. And I think that's the future. I don't believe too much in all this micro-politics saying different things to different groups.
Is there a lot of social inclusion in Watford?
I think it's pretty good at that. If there is, whatever the opposite of inclusion is, it's because of different levels of affluence rather than because of different colour or religion. Because people who came over as manual workers are more likely to live in the Victorian terraces of West Watford, first generation anyway, than they would be in the more affluent leafy suburbs to the north of Watford. Much the same as anywhere. That stops diversity, actually, but it is really more of an offshoot of the old British class system. Of course, their children go to university and things move on. I often say the first immigrant community, individuals in Watford, I think they were nearly the first, the Chowdhuries, their son, Cash, is head of the border agency for the whole of Africa. Well, his parents were manual workers. It does move on. And sure, he's a practicing Muslim, where his parents are, I presume, I don't know whether he's religious or not. Not the point, went through a British education system and took on a career like anybody else takes on a career. Though his issues will be predominantly more mainstream issues than, for example, his parents fought very hard to get a mosque. Well, he wouldn't have to do that. Hopefully, there's 3 in Watford now, or in London there's plenty wherever he may live. I use it as an example. So I don't think that the migrant communities are faced with institutionalised injustice. I think most of them, over a period of years, their politics move in the same way. If you take Jewish people, actually my late grandmother told me I should always vote Liberal. Why? Because I think it was 1892, Gladstone's Aliens Act allowed immigrants to come in the first place from persecution. So she didn't even know what a Liberal was, but her parents had said you should always vote Liberal. Then, by the time the First World War came along, Jewish people, predominantly being poor working class people, they went with the Labour movement because there were such huge injustices. I certainly would have done then. And then, after the Second World War, as time moved on, I suppose Jewish people's votes now probably reflects the rest of society in terms of all the three main parties. I don't think any of them would vote for a racist party, but at least I should hope not. And I suspect with the Asian communities, as it evolves, there'll be active people in all parties. That's how it should be. I'd love them all to be conservative, and I'd be very happy to try my best to persuade them. That's my job. But actually, what's healthiest for democracy is that Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, etc., actually are active in all three parties, because that means that they're integrating into society and playing their part in a general democracy.
That leads me on to my last question. The whole purpose of the Your Britain, Your Say initiative is to get the BAME voters to kind of vote for the party that best represents their views. What would you like to say to those voters?
First of all, I think they should vote. And there is no excuse for not voting. I'd rather you voted for Conservative, which reasons I'll explain why. But otherwise, vote Labour, vote Liberal, but don't say I'm not voting, it's nothing to do with me because I'm from a minority and we don't vote, or it's nothing to do with us. Because it's your right to vote, and I actually believe it's your duty to vote, because we're all very lucky to live in such a tolerant country, and if we're to criticise politicians, we have to do something about it, and at the very minimum that means voting. As to why I believe we should vote Conservative, it basically means, in terms of the way I can see it, is that I stand anyway for opportunity for people, and that really means opportunity, taking it that the state provides very good quality health and education and other things, but at the end of the day people should be allowed to keep as much of the money that's possible themselves, so out of low taxation, and to have a society where they are not institutionalised in council-owned properties in ghetto-type schools, but there are opportunities for those that are prepared to work, to make money, and greed's not a bad thing. If I always say to school groups, I say, hands up those that want to be teachers, doctors, etc. Put their hands up. Very good. You're helping society directly. I commend you. Hands up those that want to make a load of money. And of course, a lot of you are getting, I do, because they've seen some Alan Sugar on telly or something. And I say, well, fine, providing one, you employ people, and two, you pay your taxes, actually you're contributing as much as the first group. Well, as a Conservative, I want to encourage the second group. I want to encourage ambition. I take no pride that some people living in the former council estates in Watford, which are still much as they ever were, are the third or fourth generation living there. I take no pride in that. I want people to do as many communities have, which is each generation is pushed upwards, and that's providing opportunity. And I do believe in redistribution of wealth through taxation. That's fine, that's done. I don't think I would have been a Conservative 100 years ago, or possibly not 50 or 60 years ago. But where we are now, which is moving away from a welfare dependent society to a society where people can get on that are prepared to work hard and keep most of the benefits of what they earn, yep, I'm in favour of it, and that's why I know I'm a Conservative, that's why I think hopefully people watching this will vote Conservative.
Well, thank you for taking your time, and thank you for those answers.
I enjoyed it.
If anyone has any further questions for Richard, or if you have any questions for any other MP, send them to yourbritainyoursay@gmail.com. For now, keep an eye out on the website at www.yourbritainyoursay.blogspot.com, and keep an eye out for the next video.
And remember to vote.
And remember to vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, I really enjoyed that.